When you hear the word church, what's the first image that comes into your mind? I think for many people, when they hear the word church, one of the first things that comes into our mind is a building. It's a physical structure, like our building here on Main Street in Brewster. But in the New Testament and in Paul's letters, remember that the early church, they didn't meet in buildings like this. They met in homes, and they were often built around households. And this is a significant aspect of what we read about in the New Testament. And Paul, in several of his letters, talks about how people in a household are to relate to one another. And he, in a sense, gives relationship advice. And both in Ephesians and here in Colossians, he talks about wives, husbands, children, and slaves, because these were the people who made up a household in the first century in his culture where he lived. And it's important that we not weaponize, for lack of a better word, passages about, well, what a wife is supposed to do, or what a husband's supposed to do, or how children are to be treated, or how slaves are to behave. And I know there are people who regret that Paul and Jesus, they don't say that slavery should be eliminated, or that it's against God's will. Although we read about freedom and freedom in Christ in other places. But slavery was a part of the Middle Eastern world at the time of the New Testament. So slaves are just spoken about as part of the household. Now it's important to understand, though, that slaves in first century Greco-Roman culture, it was very different than slavery as it was practiced in the United States. And I don't have enough time in these brief devotionals to get into that in great depth, but slavery in the United States was very different. It was based on race. It was incredibly violent and abusive in ways that most slavery wasn't in the Roman world. And again, that's a larger topic than I can cover today. But the point from Colossians chapter 3 is, after mentioning wives, husbands, children, and slaves, Paul says, whatever your task, put yourselves into it as done for the Lord and not for men. And this is part of the instruction, first of all, towards slaves, but it really, if you will, filters through all Paul's relational advice. Whatever your task, put yourself into it as if you're doing it for the Lord and not for a human being. And that's how husbands are to love our wives and care for our children. We do it as if we're doing it for God, for the Lord, and not just for another human being. And one of the ways you have a loving, peaceful, contented, godly household is by every person in that household trying to serve the others as if I am serving God. And when everyone is doing that, there's not a power struggle. It's not about who's in charge. It's about how can I love and serve every other member of my household, whoever he or she may be. And I encourage you to try to put that into practice in your family as well.